So we start this third lecture of the Telecom course. If some of you have problems, questions, comments about the previous very introductory lectures, raise your voice, raise your hand, just make yourself comfortable to the course. I will provide you with some detailed briefing on how you can structure the group work next week. Okay, this is, of course, especially for 3-credit course students that can then have an outline of what we expect from you during the work group presentation. Today, we will move from the technological change in the sector towards the evolution of the supply side of the sector, and we'll try to investigate the role of different types of providers. And we'll see what happened in the very old telecom industry, how the industry was structured, who were the major competitors at that time, okay? And then following all the changes that we have talked about in terms of technology and in terms of regulation, we will try to understand what does the industry look like today, okay? So what are the characteristics? How is competition going on in the industry? What has the internet brought in terms of different ways of providing services in this specific sector, okay? One important thing is that I will not speak yet about the mobile communication industry, okay? So this will be the core of the next lecture. So whatever we say related to the supply side here has to do with a fixed telecom environment, okay? Whatever fixed telecom means, so of course even the internet and so on and so forth, okay? So we'll leave the mobile industry a bit later on. This is the very last thing we've talked about, so economic implications of the internet. We're interested in this because this shapes very much the supply side, okay? So this shapes the sector in terms of actors that can actually play an important role in the sector, in terms of structure of the service provision and structure of the network building, okay? We'll talk a lot about competition between incumbents and new entrants in this sector, but probably the new entrants that you have in mind related with the internet event are very different from the new entrants that actually got into the industry right after liberalization, okay? So what we will investigate are basically 2 waves of new entrants. The very first one followed immediately after mid-80s liberalization of the sector. The second wave was the internet, if you want, wave of new entrants, okay? Very different operators, very different implications in terms of competition, okay? We'll see also some figures about that. We've talked a lot about the transformation of the circuit switch traditional telecom network into packet switch network. We've spoken about the telecom industry in itself, but of course, I hope that just to give you some information, you are well aware that telecom network is not the only possible fixed network. Okay? The first alternative to the telecom network is the cable television network. Okay? It's a physical network in place. Okay? It is designed for video signals, but it does not only transmit video signals. Okay? So increasingly more companies are trying to exploit this type of network, which is a very broadband network, in order to provide different type of services, okay, using basically fibers. Okay? And the idea is that you can have a shared number of channels across different homes, across different households, across different businesses, if we think about this in terms of businesses. Okay? Mostly for entertainment video, okay? But again, increasingly going towards data communications. Okay? Some numbers. Look at the distribution of cable TV customers. These are absolute numbers, okay? Look at UK here. You remember we were underlining that the UK was one of the first countries to get liberalized, and cable operators in the UK were the first new entrants in the telecom industry, okay? So the UK has a relatively high number of cable TV subscribers as compared to other countries. Since we are in Italy, look at Italy. Okay, this is the situation. Not to say that we are lagging behind completely in the fixed telecom environment, okay? But as far as cable TV is concerned, the distribution is really skewed, Okay? So some countries actually witnessed the emergence of cable TV operators in the telecom environment. Other countries basically do not see them at all. Okay? These are data for 2007. The other network through which you usually see video programming, what is it? What's the alternative to cable TV? The broadband network that is alternative to cable TV. How do you watch TV? What kind of technologies you can use? You have cables, okay? You have the traditional analog and then digital terrestrial TV. What's the big alternative to this? The satellite, okay? Satellite is a really weird architecture. It is thought for long-distance transmission, okay? Basically, the repeater is out in the space. And the Earth station delivers TV, video signals to millions of consumers, okay, who can choose from a very high variety of different channels. So the advantage of this type of architecture as compared to cable and as compared to more traditional network for video programming is that you can really have a very wide range of channels, okay? Think of Sky. How does it work? You have a programming source, goes out in the space, the digital broadcaster satellite provider, okay, and then it gets to the home. Numbers, again, because I want you to get sort of aware of what's happening. This is EU TV households, okay? 64.9 million are using cable, 55.4 are using satellite, analog antenna and other. They're actually lagging behind. And then IPTV, which is a weird group of technologies, and digital terrestrial television, okay? This and this are the most traditional forms of video broadcasting. Cable and satellite, the most innovative, if you want. This is EU. If we go and look at the television access by distribution type, which is again terrestrial, the blue one, cable, the red one, and satellite, the green one. Let aside Japan, because Japan has a particular story with the terrestrial television. But what you see is that some countries, notably Italy, has a really wide diffusion of terrestrial television as compared to other type of television. Cable is extremely small, okay? Very big variety across different countries. This big variety translates into a very heterogeneous supply side structure of the market. Remember that cable TV operator and in principle also digital terrestrial TV operators and satellite operators can provide telecom services, okay? Can provide data communication. So I'm showing you this picture just to let you know that whether we consider the United States, Italy, or Belgium and the Netherlands, for example, where cable TV really saw a great diffusion over time, we have to do very different considerations in terms of the infrastructure which is in place, the technological endowment, companies that are competing in the market. Okay, so we're not really talking about a common evolution across European countries and across countries all over the world. Okay? Countries have their own specificities in terms of technological infrastructure, and this has a big impact over the evolution in the competition. Okay? Now, of course, the big problem, especially with satellite, but also with cable, is that these infrastructures are not really designed for interactive data communication. Okay? So you have a point-to-multipoint broadcasting signal, but coming back of the signals is not as easy as with the packet switch network that we saw last time. Okay? And this limits very much the type of services that can be provided over these networks. Okay? So yes, cable TV operators are competing in the telecom market, but the services that they are provided are not as comparable as those of the telecom operators. Where are we going? Okay? So before going back and looking at the industry structure, What is happening now in the market? Okay, what do you see? What do you see in the market? I've spoken about the evolution of the telecom networks, the advent of the internet, alternative fixed network. Okay, what do we see now? If you had to bet on a technology, okay, for data communication or voice or video communication, what would be your choice? Where are we going? What are we observing? Yes?
Maybe there is a sort of convergence toward the internet, because the internet you can sort of do everything like voice, data, multimedia.
Okay, so the IP protocol is there, okay, and this is a big sort of starting point. So next generation networks will be based on IP protocol, okay. Internet is not all that we see in the market. What else do we see? Yeah, wireless, okay. A huge variety of different type of wireless network that have been developed over time, okay. Again, differences across countries, Europe, United States, and Japan, and across European countries as well. Okay? So competition arising basically from the emergence of new generation of mobile networks, 3G, even 4G. Okay? WiMAX. I'm just catching some of the possible future successful networks. Okay? Probably this is the network that is going to compete with the local loop. So at the local level of users, of households, okay, WiMAX might be the next generation network that is turning out to be the most profitable one. Okay? Again, what are the implications of this for the competition across operators? Okay? Mobile operators, fixed operators, alternative network providers. And then voice over IP networks. Okay? I'm not going into the detail of this because we will have a lecture dedicated to the development of this new service, well, new bunch of services if you want, but this has really taken place very much, especially at the level of business users. Okay? Voice over IP, just to let you know, does not mean only Skype or Skype. Okay? That's a very small bit of the whole phenomenon. Okay? But that's surely one of the most important developments in the fixed telecom environment. The implication of all this is first, we will probably observe an end-to-end service competition. Okay? So different type of networks, which means different types of companies, competing for the same services. Okay? Let's have a look at this. Okay? These are numbers, the third quarter of 2008, adoption of alternative broadband networks. Okay, so we are talking about broadband. China, US, Japan, Canada, Brazil, Italy, South Korea. Look at these countries. Okay, what we observe, well, in some countries, of course, DSL or ADSL, if you want the evolution of that, is clearly the most diffused network. Okay, for broadband applications. Cable is not very much diffused, in some countries more than in others. Fiber is taking a lead in some countries. Okay? Look just at the difference between China and US, for example. They are very big markets, so competition there is likely to affect competition all over the world in terms of operators. Okay? Very different patterns of subscription to different technologies. Okay? Of course, these are numbers, absolute numbers in 2008. But if we look at the growth by technology, the figures are quite astonishing. Okay? So look at fiber. DSL, not bad. Cable, not bad. Mobile, probably worse than you might expect in terms of growth. Okay? Growth here is between 2005 and 2007, so someone might argue that actually mobile networks and mobile markets were quite mature, and this is why we do not observe a very high growth, but still, I mean, the differences are really impressive. Okay? Of course, ISDN and analog networks are sort of decreasing in importance. Okay? Remember this. because this is a very important information once we get into the analysis of the competition in the sector. Okay? Because fiber technologies is not usually provided by the traditional incumbents or by the traditional new entrants operator in the market. Okay? These are really new entrants in terms of network building and network provision. Okay? Mobile is not a very powerful network when it comes to broadband transmission and when it comes to multimedia services. Okay? Of course, I mean, we will see the mobile diffusion. We will see how many companies have started providing wireless or mobile-based services. But remember that if we talk about broadband, and this is one of the most important policy concerns also, beside economic concern, okay, it is not very much a story of mobile communication. Okay? Competition takes place more in this type of technologies, particularly these ones. Okay? From a supply point of view, these three might be seen as alternative networks. Okay? From a demand point of view, not so much probably. And again, this has lots of implications from an economic perspective. Okay? Chances are pretty good that if I'm a cable TV operator, I do not bother investing very much in fiber networks. Okay? If I go for DSL, for the upgrading of the traditional network, okay, there's no point for me in building an alternative network with fibers. Okay? Why is that? Because I'm probably cannibalizing lots of my revenues. Okay? So the existence of alternative networks means also that companies have to make choices. And very often they do not make really the right choice. Okay? Components competition. Now, one of the biggest changes that happened in the industry, if we look at the sector from the supply side, is that the most important competitors are not anymore the traditional service providers, but are the equipment producers. Companies that produce access equipment, switches, for example, okay? Network components instead of network in itself. Okay? So Lucent, for example, Nokia to some extent, Cisco, are the companies that are currently making lots of revenues and are the most R&D intensive as compared to more traditional operators like British Telecom, Deutsche Telekom, AT&T, although AT&T is somehow in between. Third, now, Rita was talking about convergence, about everything being based upon IP technology, okay, with all the implications that we've seen. But are all the networks really substitutes? What do you think? Do you observe substitution across different networks? Do you, in your practical life, substitute one network with the other? What's happening? How do you communicate with people? Yes?
Well, I can tell by my own experience. I mean, I came to Milano a year ago, and I haven't installed a phone line into my apartment because I do all my calls either on my mobile phone or voice over IP, such as Skype.
Okay.
So I don't need a phone line, actually. I just need it to get either ADSL or to get a different sort of internet source into my house.
Okay. So he's saying, well, I mean, to me, they are kind of substitutes in the sense that as long as I have my mobile phone, maybe a 3G, I don't know, 2G, 3G mobile phone, I can do pretty much what I need.
I wasn't saying like you can completely substituting, for example, Telecom with Skype, because for example there are some special calls you cannot do with the Skype. For example, emergency call, and if you are outside and you don't have the PC with you, it's very difficult to like call another person without the...
Okay. Yes?
What's happening is that you don't have a universal service provider. You rather combine services which suit you the best. For some you use Skype, for some others you use mobile phone, for some others you use, I don't know.
Okay. So you're saying more that there is more complementarity somehow across different type of networks?
I haven't found a single service that gives me the possibility to call Russia, for example, Bosnia, keep my local calls, and have my mobile phone calls in Italy.
Okay, I'm not talking about prices yet. Okay, so we're not making price consideration. But we might argue, although he's saying that that's not the case, that for voice services, okay, and this is actually the evidence that has been put forward for some countries, there is some degree of substitution, at least across fixed mobile networks. But if we really take into account more complex services or multimedia type of services, complementarity is what's happening in the market. Okay, yes?
But the methods of inertions and incidents, that is
Okay, he's saying that the emergence of 3G standards in the mobile environment basically rules out the possibility or the need for a fixed connection. I mean, with 3G phones, we can do pretty much everything. And that's why we do not need a fixed connection anymore. But yeah.
I tried to use it today on BlackBerry, and it's horrible. It just you can't use the internet. You check some info and you leave it.
Okay. Yes.
Technically, 3G can't be used widely without WiFi because like the coverage won't cover everybody's need, like a wide band.
Okay. So she's speaking about this issue a little bit. Okay. So first of all, if we are talking about substitution across networks, we have to talk about similar things, which means, for example, we have to talk about network that in terms of coverage guarantee the same quality. Okay? And right now, this is really not the case. If you're in Italy, if you're in Finland, if you're in Japan, if you're in the US, network coverage is very different also for wireless networks, especially for wireless network. Okay? This implies also that service quality and network reliability might be very different. Okay? So I don't know if you've read articles concerning, for example, the development of telecommunication in developing countries. Okay? Some are arguing, well, we do not really need to build a fixed network across developing countries. Okay? Wireless networks are more suitable for those countries, especially because of geographical coverage and distance. Okay? So no need to put lots of money in that. The counterpart would say, well, it depends very much on the type of services that you have in mind. Okay? And if you think of developing countries as countries that need just simply voice services, that might be the case, although I'm not convinced, but we can argue that mobile and fixed to some extent are substitutes. If we think of more complex services, the issue becomes much more controversial. Okay? Having substitution or complementarities, I'm coming, across different countries means that the competition might be across operators that are trying to integrate networks or across operators that are specialized in specific networks. Okay?
Yeah, we do not have a perfect substitute today, but like in technology developing fast enough to guarantee in future just one single network.
Are you asking me?
Maybe no, but I'm asking you, like what about the technological intrinsic development?
Now, I think that I'm not really a big fan of the idea that we will have one single integrated network for everything, but just for one reason, which probably does not have to do with technology, but more with economic incentives. Okay? Because if you look at the top 20 telecom operators, okay, these are operators that have a clear technological endowment in place, that have invested heavily, especially in the fixed, but also in some types of mobile networks. Okay? In order for alternative networks integrating different services to overcome the power of these companies, okay, we would need a complete displacement of those operators. And I don't really see that happening in the market. Okay? I still see a big cluster of the best, I mean, most powerful operators.
Moving towards a perfect state of the world because
That's
companies invested money and they don't want to lose them.
I mean, the idea is that that's actually what happened also with the 3G network that he was mentioning. Okay? Companies are somehow following the technological trends. So now, for example, lots of mobile operators are investing in Wi-Fi technologies. Okay, now the problem, for example, with Wi-Fi that could potentially be a big competitor for with the local loop, okay, is that you need to understand what's the business model behind that. Okay, we have Wi-Fi free access in many places. Where can I get money from? Okay, Vodafone has just shut down its Wi-Fi, Vodafone in Italy, its Wi-Fi unit, okay, because it couldn't get the right business model in place. Okay, so it is not just a matter of technological possibilities, technological opportunities, if we want to call them like that. Okay, I think that somehow in the mobile environment we could arrive to not the perfect world, but at least an integrated solution in terms of network. Okay, the problem is that you have lots of companies that are operating in the fixed environment that have invested lots of money and are not willing, okay, to lose that money. Also, because companies are not operating in a vacuum, okay? So we have users out there. And as you well know, the telecom industry, wherever you take it into consideration, is characterized by a strong presence of network effects, okay? Meaning that switching costs also from the consumer side are very high, okay? So one thing is if, what's your name again? Yeah, Toby is coming to Italy and says, okay, I have to choose which network to connect to. Okay, I have my mobile phone. I'll just stick with that. Fair enough. One thing is to say, okay, I've invested lots of money in a fiber network, okay, in a fiber connection. Now a new technology is coming up. Okay, I have all my network components compatible with that connection. I have all the services on that particular network, and now a new technology is coming up. Okay, shall I switch to that? Well, the costs are not low. And the costs are not low especially for the big users, okay, because companies are not really making money on us. Well, they're making lots of money, but not the big chunk of profits on us, okay? What really matters is the business side of the market. And firms, companies are extremely inertial in changing their technological endowment, mostly because it's costly, okay? But not only from a monetary point of view, but also, I mean, from the point of view of learning, again, how to implement and use the network, okay? So the IT department in companies have to revise completely the structure if a company is moving, for example, towards voice over IP type of networks, okay? So I'm not keen to think that we are going to have an integrated network mostly because of economic reasons. I think that the technology might do, so it might be there, okay, or in the next future, but issues on the supply and demand side will somehow hinder the development of an integrated network, okay? There is no evidence that people in their place have a unique network to access different type of services, okay? Again, we might think of substitution for voice services, but not very much from other type of services, okay? This is my view, though. Now, who are the companies in the telecom sector? Can you name 5, well, let's say 3 companies, each belonging to one of these 3 layers, so-called? Let's start from equipment. Can you think of any equipment producer? Okay, Cisco. One more? Yeah. Colt? Ericsson, yes, somehow in between equipment and network. Yeah? Siemens? You said, who said Siemens? Yeah? Okay.
There are some smaller companies in US, India, foundry networks, Pages networks kind of companies. There is some Juniper networks.
Yes. Most of these are pure equipment producer. Okay, Ericsson, bit more complex structure. It's in between equipment and network. network producers. What?
Robotics.
Robotics. Other companies. Ascom. Others. You're looking at them saying, what are they talking about? I just knew AT&T, British Telecom, and Deutsche Telekom. What are they doing? They basically provide services, okay, over network that they have built using other companies' components. Okay? So this is true especially for the new environment, but even in the kind of old telecom industries, okay, the structure was made of 3, let's say, layers in which you had the equipment, the network in place, and then the provision of services. Okay? Now, of course, if you think about these different types of company, think of robotics, think of Siemens, and think of British Telecom, okay, and think about them in terms of innovation structure, in terms of R&D departments, in terms of revenues, well, you can see that they're getting most of their profits and revenues from very different sources. Okay? R&D intensity is very different across different companies, even if they belong to a kind of R&D intensive sector. Okay? So people talk a lot about the telecom industry, and they have in mind operators. But the bulk of research and development and the bulk of profits stemming from innovation is not in the operator side of the market. It's more in the equipment and network builders, if you want, side of the market. Okay? Now, all telecom industry, basically we had a monopolistic structure. Remember, we had economies of scale and everything in the network and service components, but the equipment producers were a different part of the industry. Okay? The US actually witnessed a complete vertical integration across the different layers. Okay? AT&T, and then Nortel, and then Lucent were doing pretty much everything. But in other countries, such as, for example, small developed countries, I'm thinking here about Scandinavian countries in Europe, for example, we had a very high degree of specialization of different operators. Okay? And in more large developed countries, such as UK and Germany, just to give example, we had a quasi-vertical integration in the sense that there was full cooperation between telecom operators and equipment providers. But still, they were very different companies. Okay? And this is very important because this setting changed a lot over time. Okay? And in particular, it changed in terms of market power in favor of the equipment producers. Okay? In favor of companies that were producing systems and not that much providing services. Okay? So Ericsson, Nokia, Siemens, these type of companies are now the big operators in the market. Okay? Then the final users, of course, sort of see the competition across telecom operators. Okay? But the real, if you want, competition for profits and for big chunk of the value added in the industry lies in the equipment producer and system producers bit of the market. If we want to use the word technological regime, okay, which somehow outlines the condition for the creation of technological knowledge, the development of innovations, and the opportunities and constraints that are intrinsic in the use of that knowledge, we could say that before liberalization, so before mid-80s, then in different countries, remember that things went differently, the engine of innovation, so the most important locus for R&D development and innovation, lied in the monopolistic telecom operator. Okay? Although some equipment suppliers were actually playing an important role. Okay? The innovation system was extremely efficient. Extremely efficient because basically the incentives were not in the market. Okay? They had the right of providing the universal service. Okay? The state was somehow controlling prices. Okay? So they were guaranteeing profits to the operators. Once you set a price, you then somehow decide profit, okay, given the demand. So the incentive producing innovation in the system were really non-market based. Okay? I want to innovate in order to cut costs so that given the price that I can charge for my services, I can earn more money, full stop. Okay? Very simple system of innovation, if you want, in the old telecom industry. Okay? Big monopolists, regulated, yes, but of course they had to have positive profits, meant that the incentive were towards the cost-cutting trajectory. Okay? Let's make the network efficient so that it can be less costly for us, and other things being equal, we can make more money. Okay? So this was the most important incentive, if you want, for this company. In the old telecom industry, if we speak about the learning regime, okay, so how actually different firms were developing innovation and were learning in terms of new knowledge, what we observed was a clear division of labor across different layers. Okay? So on the one hand, we had monopoly operators who were researching and providing different designs for the networks. Okay? They were users of the equipment and of the network produced elsewhere, okay? And they were providing services to the final users. Okay? Specialized equipment suppliers, they were specialized in the very upstream level of the value chain. Okay? They were forced to internationalize because, of course, the national market was in the hand of monopolist operation. Okay? And what we observe, if we think of the specialized equipment suppliers, think of Ericsson, Nokia, Lucent somehow, okay? These are really international companies, much more than the national telecom operators. Okay? And they became international companies much before than the other operators because they were forced to do so. Okay? They didn't have the market power that was guaranteed by the universal service obligation. They were just producing pieces of the network, if you want, equipment. They could sell equipment everywhere in the world. Okay? And that's how they actually became world leaders, which didn't really happen for most of the monopoly operators, but AT&T. But that's a different story. Okay? So AT&T is still actually one of the most powerful companies, but that's because AT&T was almost the only fully integrated company at that time. So they had the capabilities also of developing equipment and systems. All the other telecom operators had the competencies and the capabilities just to provide the service and to manage big network. Okay? But network was built somewhere else. The innovation was taking place in the upstream level of the value chain. Right? Mid-80s, we have liberalization. Okay, actually, liberalization took place mostly at the beginning in 3 countries, Japan, US, and UK. Okay, together with liberalization, remember we were speaking about the transformation of the telecom networks. Barriers to entry became very low, also from a technological point of view. Okay, so we had the first wave of new entrants in the market. Now, these new entrants in the market were quite conservative, okay, in the sense that they were imitating very much the strategy, both from an economic and from a technological development point of view, of the existing operators. Nortel is one of the most important cases in this sense, without innovating very much, okay, without innovating especially in the business model. They were somehow copying the existing operators. Okay? The real new entrants, the one that challenged somehow the market power of telecom operators, arrived in the early 90s. Okay? So we had the second wave of very aggressive new, if you want, new entrant. WorldCom, Level 3, Colt, Mannesmann. I hope you've heard at least some of these companies. Okay? And together with the entry of these very aggressive operators, we saw lots of mergers and acquisition taking place. MCI WorldCom was probably the biggest one of them. Okay? So mid-'80s, yes, the countries were liberalized, regulation started to get looser, okay, but the new entrants were not extremely aggressive in terms of stealing market share, okay? They were imitating very much existing operators. The market shares didn't change very much. These operators were actually much more eager to steal customers from monopoly operators. They had better technologies in place. They could actually compete also at the network level, okay? The entry of this type of companies, much more than the first wave of new entrants, created the incentive for vertical specialization also for telecom operators. So with the entry of that companies, telecom operators started vertically specialized, okay, and they left the production of the equipment and of the network component to the specialized equipment suppliers that at the time were already operating at the international level. So they were somehow globalized. Okay? So mid-'80s liberalization, market shares do not change that much. Early '90s, very aggressive new entrants. Okay? Market shares change. What do you think is the market share of British Telecom in the fixed telecom market right now, or of Deutsche Telekom in the fixed telecom market in Germany, or of Telecom Italia? Following the liberalization. 80%. Who said 80%? You. Other ideas?
I think it's lower in Germany.
Okay.
40, less than 50%. They don't have a monopoly.
Okay, so you're saying that the new entrants, we're talking about the fixed environment. Yeah. Okay, the new entrants have somehow 50% of the market across, yeah?
Is it privates and corporates, everything?
Yeah, just.
So I would say like 20-30%.
Wow. So we are going from 80% to 20%. Here you are, okay? This is the new entrant market share, percentage of fixed analog subscriber lines, so this is a common indication, in different countries. United Kingdom, the most liberalized country, 32%. Okay? United States.
It's accumulated over 6 years.
No, this is the market share. Okay, 2007 in Australia, the new entrants have 2.2% of the market share in the analog. Okay, no, it's not cumulative. It actually comes and goes. Okay, so UK, the US, 18%, although the US has a strange structure because the liberalization started by assigning specific licenses to different operators in different states. Okay, so the US is not really the best country to compare this type of statistics, but this is Portugal, Italy, where is it? It's this one, 14.3%, and so on. Okay, so yes, we had liberalization, but if we look at the percentage of fixed subscriber lines, okay, in the traditional telecom network, of course, then you have fiber operators. That's the picture, okay, between 2002 and 2007, just to put things clear. So yes, it was good for competition. Yes?
An interesting question, but just Portugal. What happened in Portugal between 2005 and 2006 that it has jumped nearly double?
Okay, I don't know exactly, okay, so I don't know the detail of what happened in Portugal. I couldn't guess what happened. Portugal is one of the most important countries for mobile communication development, okay? So I guess that part of the story related to the change in market share in the fixed environment might be related also to what happened in the mobile communication environment, okay? But looking at specific data, I do not want to provide you with wrong or made up information. So you might want to carry out a case study on that, okay? Technological regime. What happened to innovation development, to R&D? Okay, if you read lots of contributions on the evolution of the telecom industry, the story goes like that. R&D changed location. So incumbents and new entrants were not extremely R&D intensive, okay? But innovation took place especially at the level of specialized technology suppliers, okay? Since I like numbers, I went and checked about this. Now, changing location of R&D. The distribution of R&D by layer, okay, so network elements, networks, so the physical nets, and platforms, contents, and application, is actually has moved towards network elements, okay? If we look at the type of companies, of course, some companies are active in different layers, so again, this distinction is blurring somehow. Telecom equipment make up 63% of the all R&D intensity in the sector. Telecom services, which means telecom operators, 25%. And then we have, internet and e-commerce companies that are like Google-type companies that are having a 12% of R&D in the sector. Yes?
How do you measure this? Do you just take the balance sheet and look how much they say they invest in R&D?
This, I mean, the idea is that when you have to look for R&D data, what you do is look at the balance sheet of different companies. Usually, they measure it as percentage of sales. Okay, so you also have to take this into consideration. More or less, the distribution is this one. Okay, it makes sense because most of the R&D is actually performed within the equipment companies. But again, okay, you have to think of who are these equipment providers, because here you have Siemens, but you have also Ericsson, which provides very different also telecom services. You have Nokia, and you have AT&T providing both equipment and services. So again, take it into consideration. Now, data from 2007. These are the R&D expenditure. The darker side is R&D expenditure in ICT manufacturing industry, and the lighter is R&D expenditure in the ICT service industry as a percentage of the total business sector R&D, just to give you a picture, okay, in different countries. Here you see somehow a different picture. Of course, ICT includes also some IT service providers, but still, I mean, we get a picture also of the telecom environment, okay? So in some countries, I don't know if you can see the shades, but for example, Canada and Denmark, it seems that R&D is also placed in service companies, okay? Other countries, well, Finland, not surprisingly, okay? Most of R&D expenditure is in ICT manufacturing company. There's where Nokia is located. Korea is the same, okay? But in Korea, we have a very big operator as well, which is called? There is a bigger one.
Yeah.
Who else? Samsung, okay? How many of you knew that Samsung was Korean? Yeah, I mean, okay. Let's have a look at patents. Now, these are the patents assigned to telecom operators. One important thing to notice, AT&T patents, of course, include patents that are not always telecom-related patents, okay? And the same for British Telecom, NTT, the Japanese operator, France Telecom, and everything. So these are the patents that are assigned to telecom operators over time. Okay, they're not doing very bad, especially if we compare this with the telecom patents of equipment producers. Okay, so the first table was describing patents assigned to telecom operators. Okay, one can argue again that Telecom Italia or British Telecom are applying for patent in different sectors. Shh, wait. Okay, But still, I mean, they were applying for a high number of patents. These are patents of equipment producers, okay? But these are telecom patents. And what we see is that equipment producers do actually produce a considerable number of patents, but it seems that if we really consider patents as an indicator of innovation, then the competition is there, okay? It is not everything in the end of equipment producer, okay? Look at Cisco, Nokia, I mean, we're talking about very big innovators in the sector, okay? Samsung, Lucent, Fujitsu, Siemens. Well, now Nokia, Siemens have merged, so you might as well take them together, okay? So yes, it's true that the locus of R&D has somehow moved from telecom operators towards equipment supplier, but remember that we need also to look at the output somehow, okay? And although these two are not really perfectly comparable, what we see is that actually telecom operators are not doing bad in terms of patents application, okay? If we believe that that's an indicator of innovation, then I think that we have to be a bit cautious in saying that innovations has completely moved from telecom operators to equipment suppliers. Yes?
Couldn't it be like, due to the fact also that as we saw in innovation services, it is more difficult to measure innovation in service rather than, for example, manufacturing? So statistically would be biased by this fact.
Sure. Okay. She was saying, well, if we talk about innovation, of course, patents are not the only measure of innovation, and we know it very well. But if this is true, so if we consider that telecom operators can innovate in very different ways, then these statistics are even worse in that respect, okay? Because if we are underestimating these numbers, it means that actually these companies are quite innovative, okay? Of course, when you take telecom patents, you consider just specific classes in the IPC classification, so this also might bias the analysis, okay? But still, I mean, think of the statistics, think of the number of innovation put forward, the number of patents, think of the R&D distribution, and then make your own conclusion on the competition that it's going on, at least at the technological level in the sector, okay? Again, the story that is told about the new telecom industry is that we have a new technological regime, that we have specialist technology suppliers and very low barriers to entry in this sector, which makes the market extremely competitive. And this implies a learning regime whereby incumbents are outsourcing pretty much everything to technology suppliers, okay? We've seen that this is not completely true, and actually we've seen some mergers and acquisition and joint ventures taking place between telecom operators and equipment producer, okay? Incumbents telecom operator are outsourcing and learning to use, if you want, from technology suppliers. New entrants are more focused on specific market segments. So someone was talking before about the difference between consumers and business markets. I've shown you the statistics on the market shares in the overall market, okay? Now, if we want to break down those statistics in terms of consumer and businesses, we see much more competition. Where, you think?
I would say the business market.
Absolutely, yes, in the business market, okay? Even before full liberalization, there were more than one operator providing business telecom services, okay? In the consumer market, really market shares are up to 70–80% in most of the countries, okay? So the business market is the most profitable one, and is also the one that is witnessing more competition. Okay? Competition for new operators that have not the universal service obligation. Okay, again, I'm not focusing very much on the regulatory side of the industry, but remember that these issues are quite important. You will see a person from Ofcom discussing precisely these issues. Okay, they can have more flexible structure. They do not need to be vertically integrated. They can focus on specific market. They can innovate more easily. Okay, so technological regime, again, changing locus of R&D. Learning regime, incumbents are somehow outsourcing the network development to specialized technological suppliers. New operators are trying to focus more on specific markets, okay, using a more flexible structure. Now, so far, we haven't discussed very much the impact of the internet and the development of this new network on the structure. So whatever happened in terms of new entrants, okay, went hand in hand with the development of the internet. Okay? Now, this is one of my favorite quotation when reading the history of internet development. Okay? I was mentioning it also in the last lecture. Okay? It remained for outsiders to the communication industry, computer professionals, to develop packet switching in response to a problem for which they needed a better answer, communicating data to and from computers. Okay? So the internet was very much a computing sector business. Okay? Remember last time we were saying telecom operator, AT&T in particular, didn't really understand the value of that network. Okay? That has lots of implication for the competition in the sector. Okay? First, the birth of the so-called info communications industry. Lots of companies started competing in a market which previously was extremely closed. Okay? Even after the new entrants in the telecom environment arrived. So the possibility of providing voice, video, and data services, especially data services in the sector, allowed for the birth of different industries, the birth of different companies, and the increasing in the competition within the fixed environment. Okay? More interoperability. So the internet allowed also different networks to be compatible. Okay? Emergence of 3 new layers of services. So before we were seeing just equipment producers, telecom operators, telecom network builders, and service providers. Okay? Now we can think of very, very different operators in the market. And if we consider this particular sector not anymore as the telecom industry, but as the info communication industry, can you name 3 companies that you wouldn't have named before that you think are in the top 50 in this market, in terms of revenues at least? Who is gaining from the advent of the internet in the telecom sector? Skype? Other examples? Fastway, it would have done, I think, very good even without the internet, probably. Because fibers are broadband networks. Well, they can be packet switched, but eBay? Your, what?
Why eBay?
Ask him, why eBay? What?
Your question.
The question is, we've seen that before the network was, the industry was composed of 3 layers. Okay? More or less we had equipment, telecom operators, and application providers. Now, with the internet coming into place, okay, we have a very big change in the supplier side, in the industry structure. Okay? And I was asking, who do you think are the companies that rank very high in terms of revenue, for example, in this whole industry? Okay? She said Skype. He said eBay. He said, why eBay? Apple?
iPhone has the Wi-Fi to access the iPhone, so it can be covered.
Okay. Microsoft. I was waiting for that. Okay. So, yes? Sorry? Yes? Others? Well, I think you've missed a big one, which is Google. Okay. Who said my, what? Why Google? Well, Google is among the top 10 internet, well, the top 10 telecom, if you want, companies in terms of revenues. Okay? They exploited more than probably anyone else the net, I mean the physical structure of the internet, in order to provide search engine in the first place, and then very different services, browsing and other type of services. Okay? They're doing much better than Skype in terms of revenue generating. Okay? Yes?
I have a question. Can we class Google as a telecom?
Are we?
Can we class Google as a telecom?
If we believe that the internet had a big impact on the telecom industry structure, okay, we can classify Google as a telecom company, okay, lying in a specific layer of the internet infrastructure, okay. Let's skip to this one. So, think of the telecom industry not as an industry composed by just 3 layers where you have someone producing the equipment, someone producing the network, someone producing the services, but as an industry that is composed by very different layers. Okay? So you have network element, you have network operating system, the interface, TCP/IP, then you have companies providing connectivity, companies that are in the middleware navigation, search, and information innovation platforms. Then you have companies that are actually developing content and services, and then you have consumers. Okay? So if we consider the industry structure in this sense, Google falls within this classification. Even eBay, to some extent, yes?
In my opinion, the service that eBay provides is to reach long-distance users.
Okay, so you say, well, eBay is there because it's somehow bridging the 5 and 6 layer, or it's in between them. Okay, where is Apple? Content, application, services, 5. It somehow develops platforms as well. Okay, so it's in between. Okay. Then the telecom operators, of course, are those who are active in the network development, in the connectivity provision. Okay? In analyzing all the different layers of the industry, we start from the very last one. Okay? Now, consumers start to have an important role in this industry. If we think of companies such as eBay, consumers are actually the perfect target because the internet can bridge different type of users together, okay, and not only for voice services, but also for very different type of services. Consumers are not only a source of profits or revenues, okay? They can provide feedback on how the system works, okay? We're not investigating in depth all the Linux or open source type of operating system, but in that case, it's clearly a consumer-based innovation, okay? So if you want, the locus of innovation with the internet shifts even more towards the consumer side. Second, consumers have a very important role, and this is true also if we think of the development of the networks, because they select the winning companies. Okay, much more than before, because before they didn't have alternative, basically. Okay, with the advent of the IP protocol, what happens is that consumers became the most important, if you want, selectors for the industry. Okay, they select the winning innovations, they select the companies that win. Okay? If you do not have competition, selection doesn't have any sense to exist. Okay? Once competition is introduced in the market, then demand can select the best alternative. Okay? Third, active role of consumers in the internet industry, in the new telecom industry, yes, but it's not only an active role, okay? Because consumers and consumption patterns are somehow affected by the development of the industries, okay? And the social networking services case is an interesting case by which you have a coevolution, if you want, between demand patterns, behavior, and development of innovation. Okay, so it's not only users that provide feedback to companies, it's also companies that are somehow following the demand changes in order to constrain consumers into specific services or patterns. Okay, the development of incompatible, for example, product services networks means that once I pick up an application or a service, you were talking about the iPhone, okay, I'm basically constrained in the use of that particular application of services. Okay? All the contractual relationships that are currently going on across consumers between telecom operators, IT providers, and the demand sector, okay, witness the fact that consumers are not only independent selectors, but sometimes they're also forced into the selection of specific patterns. Yes?
Exactly, that's what I wanted to say. They are forced into selection of certain patterns. Look, for example, iPhone or Apple users, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mac users. I mean, Mac doesn't offer them the flexibility. It offers them one extension, right? AAC, which is not compatible with other players.
Okay.
All songs have to be converted into that extension.
Yeah.
And then if you want to upload some songs on your iPod, then you have to synchronize it every time.
Okay.
It makes a set of barriers, which all of us, most of people don't want. I mean, you would like to have a USB type of device to connect to your computer, right?
Yeah.
Download the songs, like drag and drop the songs that you'd like to listen to. In fact, it doesn't happen with Apple, for example. So it's not the consumers that choose the winning solution, but it's rather Apple that introduces each year at their big conference in Silicon Valley. They introduce all these novelties, and users go, it has a really cool design, so let's use it.
Okay. I partially agree with that. My immediate response to that would be, well, you're not forced to choose an iPod if you really want an MP3, MP4 player. Okay, so why did you choose an iPod in the first place if you know that the strategy, the business model, which is quite successful, by the way, of that company is constraining your consumption pattern, basically?
Take, for example, internet providers.
Yeah?
You have some cities where you have only one provider. You have some countries where there is only one provider. You can't really select anything else because you don't know that something else exists in the market.
Okay.
Even for in my case, for example, coming from Boston, you have one ADSL provider, and they give only a certain number of ADSL lines per month. So there is a list of people that to be connected to the ADSL line.
Okay.
There is no other internet.
Okay.
Yes.
Which means that the market.
Where is there the consumer?
Okay. No, I agree with you. I mean,
we have some areas that are also not covered by
yes and no. I mean, if we are talking about different type of layers in the industry, okay, the event of the internet opened up competition. That's for sure, because we have more companies. Okay. Now the issue is, do we have information on them? First of all, because very often consumers, even businesses, but I mean the demand side doesn't have information on the possibilities. Okay. Second, switching costs are very high. We will go back to this. Nothing. Yeah, okay, but you have, I mean, if we think of internet service providers, for example, you have alternatives, okay? You can choose. Now, the issue is that you have more alternatives than you had before. So we're not stating that consumers now are, you know, sort of the owner of the industries or that they can select everything.
You really have one alternative, like take an IP itself of different providers, right?
Well, you have Vodafone. You have, for example, the offer by Telecom Italia and by Vodafone. Okay, there are two. There are not tons of them, but still, you have some of them. You have alternative providers. Okay? The issue is that very often the market somehow shapes also the competition. Okay? So in order to compete with the existing monopolist that is not a monopolist anymore, but still retains 80% or even more of the market share, Vodafone had to invent a completely different business model, which was let's provide integrated services. So you're competing, but you're not offering exactly the same thing. Okay? And again, as a consumer, if you want to subscribe, for example, to the Vodafone offering pattern, okay, you're somehow forced into a specific path of communication, which is quite different from what Telecom Italia is doing. I'm just making an example. Okay? But at least you have choice. Okay? I take your case that in Bosnia you do not even have choice very often. Okay? But compared to the old telecom industry, in most countries the industry has somehow luckily evolved. Okay? So you have different competitors. I don't know about the details about situations in developing countries, for example, where competition is still hindered by existing legacy in terms of
don't have a single big internet provider. You have local providers.
Yeah.
Take, for example, quarters of a city. A quarter which is covered by one local network.
Yeah.
That local network provides you with a fast internet.
Yeah.
With which you go on internet. It's really fast.
This is very similar to what was happening in the business market before liberalization. Okay, but still, I mean, I think that competition is now better. Okay, so I think that can be argued. The issue is that having the operators in place does not necessarily mean that consumers are completely free of choosing whatever they want. Okay, and in this sense, if I start choosing a specific product or a specific companies, chances are pretty good that I get locked in, if we want to use this word, in that particular companies or product. Okay? But still, I think that the situation, at least in most of the countries, has improved in a way. Okay? Otherwise, liberalization and the internet wouldn't have brought very much to the industry. Okay? Google wouldn't have been picked as a winner. Okay? Yes?
I have a specific question. You're a professor at the university, and there
Yeah.
are a lot of companies that probably come to you and ask for consultancy. Can you tell us what's really hot in the market?
Not so many.
What do they ask you like when they refer to them? They probably have a lot of data about
I mean,
what kind of models do they ask?
we can discuss about that. I think it's an interesting question. What they do not really know, okay, is the demand side of the market. So they're quite knowledgeable about the technology, about the opportunities in terms of technological development, network integration, using fixed mobile, interchangeable networks, and so on. What they really lack, but this is of course a common lack, I think, is information on the consumer side.
How do you provide them?
I mean, what you can do, not myself, but what you can do, for example, are surveys. Okay, so you start going and ask people. Okay, of course, I mean, the population you survey are very often not as unbiased as they would like to have them, but at least this is what they need. Okay, they don't need a forecasting study on where will the technology go. They probably know it much better than we do.
Some cases that you know from your practice, which already has taken place in the United States, in some more mature market that you can.
Yes, although, I mean, I'm very skeptical. We could go and talk forever. We finished the lecture now. But I'm very skeptical of saying, okay, the United States have gone that way, so that's where the demand is going, and Europe will behave in the same way. Because the story actually does not work like this. Okay? And if we look, for example, at the mobile environment development, okay, it took completely different paths in the United States, in Europe, in Japan, in developing countries. Why is that? To me, the answer is mostly because the demand is extremely heterogeneous across countries. So you cannot really draw the same conclusions by looking at more mature markets. Okay? Because very often that markets develop in a very different way. Okay? One thing is if you have just one operator providing the service using one standard. Another issue is you have 10 different operators having different standards that probably are not compatible with each other. Okay? So consumers are different. And the needs of consumers are very different. Okay? And even from a geographical distance perspective. Okay? So a country like China or as India is very different also from a geographical connotation from the US, for example. Not to talk about socioeconomic condition, but then that would be a very different set of issues. Okay? But I'm interested in that, so we might be able to develop that more. Now, consumers are sources of revenues, and that's probably the most important thing. They can provide feedback to suppliers. They are sources of information. Think of all the Web 2.0 development. This is something that we will investigate much later in the course. They're content creators, sources of knowledge, bloggers, different kind of roles. Okay? This is what we are talking about when we talk about layer 5, Yahoo, eBay, so it's there, YouTube, just examples, companies that provide content application services. Layer 4, Google would be here, okay, more here in the middleware search engine provision. Layer 3, these are internet service providers in the pure sense, like Tiscal in Italy, T-Online in Germany, for example. Okay, there are other examples, of course, in different countries. They entered the market because of the internet. Okay, they were not in the market before. And then we have, of course, the layer of network operators with different type of companies providing different type of services, and access network operators that can be fixed, mobile, and other wireless. Okay. Now, think again about the technological regime if you want. Okay, so where do innovation take place? These companies are extremely capital intensive. So if we think of network operators or access network operators, okay, what we see is that they have a key role as capital investors. These are the percentage of capital expenditures over sales, okay? The average, again, per layer, and this is the distribution. 92% of this lies in the telecom services, okay? If we move to layer 1, so if we move to the equipment producers, the old Siemens, Lucent producers, okay, we can distinguish between devices and systems. If you want, Ericsson would be more a system producer. If we think of Cisco, Cisco would be more device producer. Okay, these companies have a crucial role in terms of R&D intensity. Okay, and again, if you want to look at the distribution of R&D intensity in percentage of sale, this is the average per layer. This is the overall distribution. Again, with R&D, the situation is a bit less skewed as compared to the capital expenditure, okay, but still more than 60% of the R&D lie in the telecom equipment group. Okay? Very last thing. These are the top ICT R&D spenders. Expenditure in US millions. Okay? Microsoft, Siemens, Samsung, IBM, Intel, Nokia, this was when Nokia and Siemens got merged, so we don't have comparable data available. Panasonic, Matsushita, Sony, Cisco System, Motorola. Okay? No telecom operator, at least no pure telecom operator. Right? So R&D has shifted from telecom operators R&D lab towards communication equipment. If we consider the big ICT sector, so including also companies that we wouldn't have considered in the traditional industry, such as Microsoft, for example, or IBM, telecom operators basically disappear. Okay? So what's left in terms of innovation and R&D intensity, and here you have just the top 10, but even if you had looked at the top 20, things wouldn't have changed that much. You would have had AT&T in that. Okay, so AT&T is within the top 20. Yeah?
So what's the story about IBM becoming a completely new company which provides consultancy basically?
Oh,
they still do some R&D.
It's the same story with Kodak, right? Providing films for movies,
well,
right?
yes, although...
for like 90% of the revenues, and then
yeah,
Kodak is doing bad because they lost digital camera.
Yeah.
The whole Hollywood, is
yeah, we're mixing different things. Okay, now, IBM has become basically an IT consulting company. Let's put it like this. Okay? Nonetheless, it's still very active in terms of R&D. Okay? Very often, IBM has somehow R&D contracts that are outsourced by other companies. Okay? So they do R&D. The thing is that they do not produce, if you want, PC anymore. They just are an outsourcer somehow of R&D. Okay? The Kodak story is slightly different. Okay? So that was actually a complete change in the structure. Okay? Here we still have IBM in the overall ICT industry. It's more on the service than on the equipment, although, as you say, it still appears very often in the IT equipment.
They're also producing it, right?
They are producing equipment, but this is the industry where they belong to according to official statistics. When you see these R&D figures, it's not just for producing hardware. Actually, this is the last, let's say, the more scarce bit of R&D activity. Okay, so they do lots of R&D, but what happens is that other companies tend to outsource R&D to IBM. So they very often serve as consultants, let's say, for other companies. Okay, so I'll stop here. Otherwise, I have to start talking about the mobile communication, and we have just 5 minutes left. So tomorrow we will discuss the mobile communication evolution.